Welcome back, guys, to the Pro Physique Code. Today we have myself, Coach Jess, and Coach Christina, but we have a special guest today. We have Ryan Doris joining us, and you might know him as, what's your Instagram handle? The Natty Pro.
The Natty Pro.
Yeah, I always know people's Instagram handles. And then I'm like, oh yeah, no, I follow them. I just don't know what their real name is. But we're excited to have you on. I think today's chat, we just want to get to know you a little bit more and your journey through fitness. But why don't you just start off by introducing yourself to our listeners?
Okay. Well, my real name is Ryan. It's a super easy name. I actually came up with the name the Natty Pro. I feel like this was back in it had to be 2012 when Instagram was first like sort of blown up.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone was like, what's my second identity name outside of my normal boring life?
Yeah.
And all the natural pro bodybuilders, there just seemed like no one had made the claim for the for the title. So I was like, yeah, that seems like an easy marketing thing, right? And at the time, obviously, like natural bodybuilding and competing 10 years ago, that was like the main space I was in. And I think anyone who listens to Pro Physique, the modality that you sort of fell in love with and really got committed to is stemmed out of this sort of natural bodybuilding base, right? And we started doing this years ago with that small group. It was Lane Norton, it was Paul, it was me, Panasco, and there was maybe like Lauren Conlon. There was maybe like 15 people Lane had around him. And he I have to give it to Lane. He really started off an insane culture of natural body. I mean, you can talk to a grandma about macros nowadays. We've done an awesome thing with this group and how well I think we've culturally have shifted things. So I think, you see that once, and how can you not believe it again? Like I was there, I saw it, right? I remember my first macro meal back in 2009. My mind was blown. I said I can eat pasta sauce and my mind was blown. And so I don't know, I just never settled on that. I felt like I was there when macros went crazy. I was there when hit cardio and types of cardio, and I just believe that you have to keep knocking and searching for things. I don't think I'm in a phase where I'm proactively looking for things. We get bored, and you know it, and you feel it, and you know it, and you can't deny it. And so I think I've just not lied to myself the best I can. Like when I'm writing my 12th program and they all look the same and feel the same, there's got to be something different. There's got to be something different. So I think I'm trying to do a better job as I get older to not just say I've mastered the skill of getting people lean, keeping people a certain body fat in the off season, but what more tools can we add to this thing now that it's blowing up, now that everyone knows about macros, right? We are obviously a group that has a lot of knowledge, and we've changed the world through what we've already done. And why should we stop, right? Like we have the brains, whether we want to admit it or not. It's us who are doing these things. So I'm a graduate of our school, of our class, and I feel it's my duty to keep learning, to keep seeking, and keep finding and seeing what comes, seeing what's out there, what can help our whole thing that we do here. So
Yeah, cool. I think something that's like I think I started following you like, oh my gosh, at that time. Like
at that time,
when like Lane Norton and then I started following Paul, and I was like, ooh, I like this guy. Like I like this like group of people and their mindset, because I was working with athletes and sports nutrition, and then I transitioned to like a personal training atmosphere, and that just like blew my mind coming from working with athletes for so long. I was like, okay. And so I think like this evolution of finding things that work for people and continuing to discover new ways of doing things that are kind of not strange, but maybe looked at as something that's not conventional. Yeah, it's interesting to me.
Yeah, and I also think it's necessary, almost from a deeper, how do I say it, subconscious, spiritual, deep level. This universe is a universe of motion, right? It has never once settled on something and said, this is it, this is the rule. Things come, things go. things change. And I think especially us as thought leaders, as coaches, we can't go to school just once and say, this is it, these are the ratios. There's so much more. We're in a, like, we don't play basketball how we did back in the 1950s. They don't play basketball how they did when Kobe was around, right? Things are changing so fast. And if, how do I say it, if we're going to stay sort of at the helm of what we've introduced with, you know, being open to new ideas and new things, we have to start seeing things as, we know what works, we know what conservatively should stay in, but what else is there? And I think there's a fine line. Sometimes you can kind of just get into messing around and you're not as productive, and I've gotten into those phases. And then sometimes it's clear as day, we are lacking this, right? We're sort of missing these things here. So that's been my journey for the past, few years. So Pilates has probably been the biggest thing as of recently that I've been doing.
Right. No, and I love that. So you brought up natural bodybuilding, right? So obviously with that, you're going to be lifting a lot, managing things super tightly and things like that. And then for when you started focusing more on getting comfortable running and things like that, were you still lifting with like a similar level of intensity like then?
No, because that was the pandemic. Right.
Yeah.
It was more of an adaptive thing for pandemic. So before the pandemic, my lifting still looked a lot like what's colloquially known as the power building split, right? You have your compounds, and they could be any big compound. It could be any variation of the deadlift. It could be any variation of a squat, a pause squat, you know, any power main compound lift, plus the regular hypertrophy ranges. And then cardio before the pandemic, for me, and I think for a lot of coaches, it was determined completely by when are you competing and when you're not competing, right? And I think the pandemic helped me switch this, right? I should never, the cardio, as you guys are, you know, you're educated, the cardiovascular system is an entirely different system of aerobic health. You feel different when you're, that's why I always used to mistake, I liked when I was 10 weeks out, I liked how I felt, and it wasn't that I was in great cardiovascular shape, right? My cardio was up, my cardio was high. And I think the pandemic helped me see that running or cardio should be trained independently completely of what we're doing here. And this isn't new. Baseball players do this. Football players do this. Like, people run independent of their main activity. For me personally, I'm always trying to find ways to implement things with lifting at the top. So out of my running experiment, I think I ran for about 2 years, and I found that it's not very easily recoverable. And you make a lot of mistakes when you're out there running. There's holes, there's uneven ground, and I think the chance for injury is really, really, really high. So I took it back to the drawing board and said, how about just doing like medium intensity steady state on elliptical, right? And so you kind of find a compromise. You find something where the reps are going to have less issue and things like that. And so during this running phase, what I found was how bad of a runner I was. I would always have an IT band issue or something. It's always something, right? And so during this discovery, what I found is that when you program something for someone, or when you run, or when you do anything, the thing that gets in the way more than anything is someone's is injuries, or they have a pain, or something happens. Currently, the current solution we have, and I think this is the big question I'm currently asking, is, so let's say you do want to run once a week, or let's say that you do want to lift for this frequency and think, but you can't keep up with it. How do we stay injury free? How do we get better? 10 years ago, one book came out by Dr. Kelly Starrett. It's called Becoming a Supple Leopard. I'm sure everyone has heard of that book. The only issue with the book is that no one can read the damn thing. No one, and I mean no one, can read that thing. It's like, it's talking midline stability. And so what we end up doing is, my knee hurts, let me go to the knee page and just do and just do a singular thing, right? That would be like if you said, oh, I want to get my abs lean, and you just did sit-ups, right? That's the equivalent, right? So that's a thing, right? We know a method, we know the full method, whether it be competing, whether it be, and you can't just do one or two things. And I found that, in terms of us right now, people who are talking about building skeletal muscle, getting leaner in body fat, we actually don't have a system that keeps us healthy. We're using sort of this system that CrossFit has with Kelly Starrett's mobility method, and it's very physio PT based. But we can't read the damn thing. Like everyone's eyes are sort of blind. So enter Pilates after all this whole running thing, right? So everything I do, and I'll make this clear, is so in the name of bodybuilding. That's everything I do. Everything is, how do I make the bodybuilding better, right? I never truly want to leave bodybuilding. It's my happy place. I like how the reps, I just love it. I was doing a leg press. I was just on 315 the other day, and just the jingle of the plates, just the sound, just everything about the gym. I love it. So enter Pilates. If you want to stop me, please stop me, because once I start talking about
I'm like fascinated. I'm like, tell me more.
Yeah, you just
okay.
Why is why Pilates?
Okay. So go back to what I said about the Kelly Starrett book. So in my coaching, one thing that I learned is that there are archetypes of people. You might have a type that moans and complains every check-in, but they get it done. You might have a type that doesn't say a word. They don't say a word to you, and if I have to say of all the types we've coached, I'd probably say there's at least 60 types. There's probably 60 types of, and you learn them. Some you can't stand, some you love, you know what I mean? And so anyways, I learned that one of the things that makes the, let's say, bodybuilder, bikini competitor, anything that's on that NPC bodybuilding presentation stage, we have a few archetypes that we all have in common. We are addicted to the idea of control, right? Like if I don't have control here, I'm gonna be like controlling to like my mother. I'm like, don't say that to me. It's like it'll eke out somewhere if I don't get it here. Like I'm crazy.
So A-type, like OCD.
All of us,
yeah,
every single one of us. It's sick, right? But thank God there are outlets for us, right? I can breathe. Like I have something where I can have an outlet, and I don't have to be a psychopath, right? I have a channel that I can put this towards. The list goes on, right? Pilates has all of them. The hardcore, the go too far, the go till you die thing. And I found that Pilates itself is mostly done by dancers. So, okay, why Pilates? A little history on Pilates. Okay, so Pilates was made and created singularly by this guy named Joseph Pilates. He was a guy, right? And Joseph Pilates was this German guy. He was in this concentration camp in World War I, like during the First World War, and he was like a circus performer, just old training, pre-bodybuilding, pre-us, right? Like what were they doing before we existed?
And circus training.
I mean, well, think about it. Let's say you have a gift and you feel athletic, and there's no NPC. There's just like the fucking circus. So you teach.
I do that.
Ring rows. I mean, for days.
I would. I always tell my fiance. I said, if it weren't for this, I'd be either in a circus or I'd be a merchant somewhere on a boat, or I'd find a way. I would get out. I would totally find a way. So he did it, right? He was one of the early pioneers. So whenever World War I was, late 30s, definitely before 1940. Definitely before 1944, 45. So around that time, he was in a concentration camp, and this guy did a lot of things. Did circus training, was boxing, in a German guy during World War I. And I think that's essential because you have to know the thinking that this guy was in. Everyone knows what was going on in Germany during that time. They were in like a crazed state, I guess you can call it. I mean, I don't know what was going on over there, but the thinking was different. It was very Nazi thinking leaning. Though that thinking did terrible things for the world, that works really well with exercise. I hate to even put those two things together, but the form of exercise this guy thought of during his time, it's the most hardcore shit ever, like I've ever experienced. It's unbelievable. The things he asked you to do. Like, I remember the first time I did an arms workout with my friends when I first started bodybuilding. I woke up the next day and I said, I legitimately thought my arm was broken, right? Because we worked so hard. I never got sore. You remember your first sore? I thought it was broken.
Yeah.
He applies the same thing in his method to these deep muscles, starting with the diaphragm down to the pelvic floor, you feel soreness in areas that the bluntness of a dumbbell just can't access, right? So if you think about all the skeletal muscles, we can access the ones that we can see. We can access the ones that we can pose in front of a mirror and see. But there are so many things you can't nail. Let's say, for instance, you have someone, and this is just an example, who's posing from facing the curves and posing from the rear in a bikini contest. Sometimes you might see maybe their shoulder blades don't look even, or something, and you can't figure these deeper sort of things out. Pilates exists to figure these deeper things out. And I think what works so convertibly well is that they use reps, they use sets, they use resistance. It's like a language I already speak, so to speak. So I tried Pilates for the first time, I'd say probably last year. And I literally was just bodybuilding post-pandemic, just trying to get back into it, lose my pandemic weight, the whole regular thing. And one day I go to this gym, it's just a different gym. They're like, we'll give you free massage, free whatever. And so I go sign up. And so I get on this thing called a reformer, go with my fiance, and I lay down, and it looks medieval. It looks scary.
Yeah, it's not that thing with the cords and like
right behind him.
It's nuts,
right?
Isn't that
no? Okay, so this is one of, so he has, so there's like 8 different pieces, I'd say, of pieces of equipment we can use, right? So this one here is called, let me move my screen a little bit. So this one here is just called a springboard. So this is a variation of one of the big pieces of equipment. So this is just basically springs, right? So there's a spring there, spring here, and there's different things you can do. What they do essentially with this is that instead of trying to use a dumbbell, they use a metallic spring resistance. So you're still getting, it feels a lot like a band, except it's a metal spring, right? So if we were to try to work the spine and all things around the spine, I couldn't do it with a dumbbell. A dumbbell's center of gravity moves and changes and things like that. But with spring resistance or band resistance, right, I can get that tension on a much deeper level. So what Pilates does is pretty simple. It's super recoverable. I think that's where I'm like, bingo for this. I don't have to change my training whatsoever in terms of lifting, right? The second thing, to me, if I had to give a simple phrase to what it does for me as a lifter, it's like fertilizer for my lifting. There are some things that every athlete just can't figure out, right? Like most injuries, I think personally, are either won by freak accident or by overuse, or overuse using bad reps, right? Yeah. Squatting with bad form. Most injuries, I hate to say this, are self-caused. Most of the injuries I've seen that people have are self-caused. And that's fair even up to the highest level, right? I was watching ESPN when I was doing some cardio, and I saw that they said I forgot the football player's name, but he's on the impossible to play list, right? There's levels to an injury, right? And this guy is just impossible to play. And I assume that happened from some bad habit he was doing for the past 14 years. And eventually the part just goes. It's like a tire or like a car or anything else. So the way I look at it says, okay, so what am I doing? I'm training my extremities. I'm training that everything I have access to. But on a deeper level, my spine is just deconditioned, right? On a deeper level, like I don't actually know the relationship between my collarbone, my scapula. Like how does that work? Where do my elbows go, right? We don't know. And because bodybuilding, how do I say it? You can bodybuild unintelligently, it will still work. So the method doesn't need these questions to be addressed, so to speak. But what Pilates does is it says, all right, every single skeletal muscle you have, everyone, down to the breathing, down to everything, let's find them, let's work them. And the method is wicked. So generally you would do these moves, and these moves are just a combination of things, right? So the joints move a few ways. So obviously with let's start simple, right? So if we were to start with biceps, one everyone knows, right? It's a single simple joint. I'm trying to get my arm in this camera. It's a single simple joint, right?
Everybody has to listen on YouTube now or watch on YouTube.
You have to watch. It'll make sense. So if I open this elbow joint, right, this bicep is relaxed, right? We know that. This is what we would call, if I went this way, the eccentric portion of an exercise. And if I were to curl the bicep, that's the concentric portion. That'll build most of your muscle, eccentric, concentrics. When you start going into strength lifts and the power lift, the eccentric gets a little more complex, right? So that's why everyone can lower a bench, miss the concentric, They can lower a squat, miss the concentric, because the eccentric is generally 40% stronger. I mean, you can always lower a weight, right? If you always have the availability and strength for that. But we don't necessarily
feel like gravity is just down. Like
it is. But also, how do I say it? When you shorten a muscle, it takes more work than to lengthen a muscle, right? Like what Pilates does is that it removes this idea of what bodybuilding is looking for. Bodybuilding is saying the focus is shortening the reps. Now you can add negatives if you'd like to, but it's not needed, right? You don't have to write negatives in the program. Every program does not have negatives. Every program does have 10 to 15 reps, right? There are some things that are needed that we just, scientific fact, we're not going to try to change, right? But in Pilates, what it does is that says we're going to train these muscles. Sorry, my watch is speaking up. We're going to train these muscles, and we're going to train the eccentric portion as well as the concentric portion, sometimes together for different parts, right? And when you start doing these weird combinations, something strange in you starts to happen. You feel a sensation you've never felt. And I don't think that's any more unbelievable than saying if you started to lift weights, you would feel a sensation in yourself that you've never felt before. Right. So the way I'm looking at it is pretty straightforward. Back to the Kelly Starrett thing. How do I get some reps in me that can strengthen me, give stamina to the little tiny areas that are weak? And I think Kelly Starrett has addressed this in the CrossFit world. And if you can get this method down, you'll have a keg, a box, a bunch of bands, like you just have this sort of, everyone has this sort of hodgepodge mobility box, and we're all sort of staring at it, and we all sort of don't know what to do with it. And I think the issue is that to learn something, you have to be part of a culture, right? You all joining Team Pro Physique, it is increase your knowledge like so much, right? I know that if you really want to learn this thing, you you can't miss a podcast. You have to absorb yourself in it. You have to listen. You have to be there. And I feel like if you don't do CrossFit, it's going to be very difficult for you to even understand Kelly Starrett's method. It's a good method. I love his method. It's a great method. But it's been out for 10 years, and no one I know in my community can read this book. So you know what I mean?
Never read it.
No.
Okay.
So I started out in CrossFit. That's how I went from CrossFit to bodybuilding and like stuff like that. So I had gotten really into it then and owned it before I started like my master's and stuff like that. And I'll say when I had it before, I did exactly what you said, where you have something that hurts, you go to that page, paragraph, and you're like, oh, fuck this. And then you put it away because
you put it away.
What am I even trying to read? And I mean, if anything, it's probably a lot of what I learned while getting my master's that helped me, because I was learning more about biomechanics. And
absolutely.
I did a whole semester where I was writing on the mechanics of being a pitcher for baseball.
Interesting.
And so that made it really interesting, because then you had to think more about like, if a pitcher has a broken toe, it's going to potentially ruin his ability to pitch correctly. And especially if it's on the opposite and you're thinking about the midline and how everything affects everything and like all of that stuff. That was the only reason it started to make sense to me. And I own so many of those books where I was just like, ugh, what is this?
Absolutely.
I'm totally looking at it online right now.
I got Dr. McGill, I think it's like
Stuart McGill.
Right? I have his. And it can kind of be the same way sometimes. And what's funny with everything you're saying about Pilates, I actually literally, while you were talking, took a second to sign up for an intro to Pilates at my gym. I'm gonna go try it. But a lot of the similar things come up when you start working on repairing your pelvic floor postpartum.
Absolutely.
And so I lift so differently, and like, because I think so much about how everything needs to work together for me to be stronger, to not mess things up, and things like that. And like, even today I was doing goblet squats, and you can watch some people like fly through these things, right? But if you're really going heavy enough and your body's having to work to not pull you forward, and you're really engaging like your TVA and like driving up through stuff, you can feel it was almost more of a core exercise than my legs.
Absolutely. And so this is the thing about Pilates, that I find, at least for what we're doing, helpful versus everything else, right? Either you go write a dissertation and you write your capstone on how to throw a baseball, right? Either you become a physio yourself and you learn this and you still get it somewhat. In my opinion, how do I say it? I think physios are looking at it like a physio, right? If you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail to you, obviously. And so I feel like the issue with that is no issue other than most people don't speak that jargon, right? We have no idea what's being said. And then the second issue, I think it's more important. And what I've always felt as an athlete, you don't have to know anything about aero engineering to fly an airplane, right? You don't have to know anything. I don't have to pass the test on how to build an airplane to be a pilot. That's not the test. I'm looking for pilot stuff, feedback and feeling. And I feel there's two ways to learn it. You can read about this stuff, midline stabilization and centering and all these things, and you can read it in a book and say, I think I understand the concept. Or you can learn it. You can feel what it feels like. And Pilates focuses completely on the feeling. And I think what makes it genius is that they teach it in a way I've never been taught. All kinesiology is thrown out the window. All terms that I know, bicep, supine, all that stuff is just out. They go into this world of sort of visual movement. So a lot of the people who have upheld this method after Joseph Pilates are dancers. And dancers have moved every muscle, every way you can think about ever. Fast, slow, jump, down, split. They've thought about every movement. I have not. I have not thought about every movement. I think about my small ranges of motion. I think about bar path. They think in movement more dynamically than we can ever think. Therefore, the language they've developed, it's almost like it's like hieroglyphics or something. At first, you're in there and you're overwhelmingly confused. And then at some point, you start realizing, like, okay, this is some of what Stuart McGill was talking about in his big three. This is what Kelly Starrett was. And so you start realizing that there's one spine, and it almost becomes, how do I say, the sort of universalness. And the best way that I can sort of, that I've put it to people is like this. In bodybuilding and strength, there is no master modality. If you were to go to, like I said, a football practice, they are for sure running sprints. They've said sprints is something we still have, how do I say it? We're coming out of this sort of great renaissance period of nutrition, I think, with how we've reformed it and how we've changed it. But what now, right? We're all 40 and 30 plus and gaining on 50. What now? I'm like hurt. My elbows hurt all the time. My shoulder hurt. Like things are falling apart. And so I think it's up to us, the same generation that push macros and change nutrition to push and try something else. So the thing about Pilates that I will say that's different than anything is you don't come with your brain. It's a lot like bodybuilding. You just get in there and you feel your way through. And I think that's it. It's like being a parent or anything else. There's what they say in the book, and then there's what actually is. And then when you can make that sort of merger, I think a wonderful thing happens. It's almost like you can see, they have this, I use this, a religious idea, right? You can see something Jesus said, or you can see something Buddha said, and you can say, oh, they're pointing to the same direction, right? Or you can see it even on a smaller level, right? The way someone might coach something in nutrition, they might just, it's just there's one truth ultimately, right? If there's one spine, there's one truth. If there's one elbow, there's one truth. There's many ways to go about it. There's many ways to get different things. Maybe you want a bigger arm, or maybe you want better mobility in it. But what I'm solely focused on in Pilates is gaining availability to use that muscle. So many people have given up on certain things. So many people just say, oh, I can't reach and scratch my back there anymore, or oh, I don't turn like this anymore, or I don't do that, and we just stop doing stuff. We just give it up, right? You probably, how do I say it? You're probably trained really well up until you're about 6 years old. You can do everything at 6 years old. You can do a full Pilates method at 6 years old, and our body's no joke. If you don't use it, you lose it. We've just been losing shit since like 6 years, slowly. And the aging process is no joke. If you do not use it, it will adapt and throw it out the window. So for me, I don't want to do jujitsu. You know, I don't want to get like choked and stuff. Like if I get it, they're moving and you just got to move, right? I don't want to do that. Right?
I don't want to get kicked in the face. Like
I don't want to get kicked in the face. Look, I don't want to get kicked in the face, dude. I do not, right? And you can already see people doing this. And so I think the prelude to me getting to Pilates was running. And I like running. And I think running is this whole other thing. But for me to, at least I think for us, honestly, to prioritize muscle building and whatever our focus may be, if that's still your number one, running is highly competitive. Running is highly competitive for that spot, right? It is. And I don't think there's anything wrong with what we've already explored in cardio. I don't need to go on about cardio. We know from low intensity that we know, right? We've done it. And I think the major thing that we're missing now is, how do we heal? How do we regain movement? How do we go through these slow ranges of motion? And right now, I think the PTs have done a fine job. I think Kelly Starrett and what they've done in CrossFit, I think ART, I think all that stuff, I think they've done an amazing job. But I can't help but notice everyone I talk to from my community is just confused. And that's that's not effective. That's just not effective.
I feel like you can go to a chiropractor and you'll get something different than a PT. And like I know a few individuals who do like FRC and like that kind of like
FRC.
Yeah, FRC.
What is that?
I never heard
functional range. Oh, it's functional range conditioning. So like cars and things like that. And they'll do like classes on it. And that's, again, like that's great. And I pull pieces from these things, but you're right. You don't actually, it's like going into the book and going, oh, my knee hurts.
Absolutely.
Okay, but it's like, no, like maybe it's your hip, or maybe it's your foot, or maybe you slept weird because we're old. My question to you is, do you find, like, from a bodybuilding like background, I feel like a lot of us are just like more just tight. Like what were your biggest hurdles when you got into the space of Pilates? Was it your lack of immobility, or was it lack of your body awareness?
No. Can I tell you what it honestly was?
Yeah.
The white women, dude.
Okay, good point.
Goodness. Oh my goodness. Okay. Here's what I'll say. All right. So let's say you're a white woman from Omaha, Nebraska, and you're 28 years old, right? Chances are you'll sign up with a coach who speaks your language. This is not about any of that. It's culturally, you get information from who it makes sense from to you, right?
And you mentioned culture, so this is so interesting to me.
Dude, I'm like Ronnie Coleman in there, right? Like I'm like,
they're all probably like that. Before you got on, I said something about like how like training before to always be like the biggest guy in the room, and then I was like, he's going to Pilates. He's always the biggest guy in the room.
I'm the only guy. I'm the only guy. Oh, I will say this: I'm loving Pilates though, right? I mean, it's somebody different. Like I'm like totally diverse in there. But that's been the difficulty. I don't know what, I probably would say the biggest barrier I would say to Pilates, it was the culture, right? Like if you were going to take someone and take them to one of the pro physique camps or anything like that, and if they are not from our world, they would be just the language, it's just, I was just overwhelmed. And Pilates is that same thing. But I also think in some same way, that's the strength, right? If you want to be a really good lawyer, speaking law and being with lawyers will really help you. The issue that I've run into with other mobility systems, and this is just me as a bodybuilding archetype, there was no culture that I could get into, so I didn't get it, right? The more you can have friends in something, the more you can have people in something, the more you can sort of talk about something, it creates a sense of community. And I think the dancers in Pilates who teach this, it's mostly dancers. I'd say it's 95% dancers who teach this. I've never seen anything like dancers for one. If you get injured in a sport, you call a timeout. Not dancers. If they're injured, the show must go on, right? They're the most hardcore people I have ever met in my life. And they're so inconspicuously tough. That's the thing about them, right? Like they're so hiddenly tough. And so the language, the words, the names of the exercise, right? You'd see an exercise and it would be called like a pull-up or something. And I'm like, that's the name of the pull-up, right? And in their world, they are just like, the pull-up is what we do a pull-up on what's called a pull-up bar, right? They do a pull-up on what's called, this apparatus called a chair. You do it from the floor, and it's almost like a handstand type movement, and your legs get, and it's almost like a pike with a handstand assistance from the bottom of a spring, right? Something like that. And so for me, the language was first. People would talk to you, and then it'd be completely different. And then how do I say it? I'm not a white woman. So it takes forever for people to warm up to an outsider, period, right? Like if you were a white woman and you went to an all-black football camp, it'd take a while, right? You wouldn't be throwing that football. Right. Yeah. And but I think this is what the beauty of what I've learned with Pilates. It's like, I cannot believe how much information I've learned from this world, right? I'm blown away with how much mastery these people have. And they're talking reps, they're talking sets, they're talking range of motion, they're talking muscles, they're talking all the things I know, but the way they do it is completely different than the way I would do it. And so I think, how do I say it, in terms of learning, in terms of actually getting a modality that sticks with you, there's groups of people, there's culture, there's community, there's the same exercises, they're just like us, same exercises over and over. You get better at it, you keep showing up, it's same rules as muscle. So for me, I read Kelly Starrett's book years ago, and I'm just nothing. I couldn't get anything out of it. But when I went to Pilates, I didn't have to take on the educational portion. I can just show up, and I can trust that my teachers will teach me, and I can kind of communicate them what I know. And they're masters of movement. They're dancers. They've done every movement there is to do in the book. You name it, they've done it, and so they open things up for you. They find all these chains that don't make sense. Like you said, if something on your toe is not well, they know how to do it. And the trick to Pilates that I think is genius is that when you do any of the exercises, the diagnosis of what's wrong with you will be exposed through the exercise. And that same exercise that gives you a diagnosis will cure you. It's not like the medical world where one person has to diagnose you, then you have to go to this other scary world of surgery for the cure, right? You lay down, you do the thing, they find that this is wrong. And it may be something as simple as, oh, you don't adduct enough when you push away, or your heel won't stay down when you lift this or that. And you basically break down movement to the tiniest forms, to these complex, strange movements that only a child would do, roll their butt over their head and all these crazy things, right? And the diagnosis shows you this is what you're missing. And then you start realizing like, oh, well, when I leg press, that's why this one side always feels shifted or something. And we live with these, and we just live with these things, and we don't know the answer, because we can look in a book and take a guess and say, maybe it's my piriformis, or maybe, and we're kind of just throwing darts at a board, sort of. But with Pilates, you feel it. How do I say it? You program it just like walking, right? Like, and you become smarter. It reminds me of like it's like the genius of the nervous system, right? If you were to take a chicken, cut its head off, it would keep running, right? Basically, without a brain, our nervous systems can remember things. It can still, without a living brain, even a chicken can still run with its head cut off. It's quite amazing. And so it becomes, I guess the word would be second nature, right? You start learning what a movement feels like. You start recruiting things deeper. You start knowing where positions go. And you start learning all types of things, from posture all the way up to moving better. So is Pilates, what I say, is it a miracle? Is it? No, it's just we're at an ignorance with mobility and movement, no different than we were with macros 15, 20 years ago. And I really do feel like with Kelly Starrett's book, there's going to be a flood of these modalities coming in soon. They're already doing it. LeBron James is already doing this stuff. Like, they're already doing this. It's just a matter of time, is when does it get to us normal people? So for me, I did Pilates once, twice. And then by the time I got to my 15th session, I said, how do I learn more of this? How do I get what's going on here? And my teacher, I love her. She's great. She's a dancer. She said, you can sign up for a training program. So last year, September, I went into this training program. Did not know
like a Pilates training program?
Yeah.
Right. So I'm a Pilates teacher now. So
Oh,
yeah, so
okay.
I know the whole method, the entire method. I teach people. My fiance and I, we built a small studio like half a mile from our house. Like it's just a small studio with one piece, and our goal is to just show this to people, right? It's so early. I feel that the best thing I have is that, like, okay, I don't have a profitability model for this. I don't have anything, but we need to know this. I feel like it's the biggest hole I've ever seen in in a training method. So right now that's where I'm at. I've learned it just to say I got it. I'm continuing to learn, continuing to just get on microphones and shout it, show people, connect with people. And my goal is to just talk about it until people just try it and stick with it, because it's completely different. It's a completely different world. It'd be like going to get a massage, right? It does help. There's a whole other world of professions that can just say, lay down, I'll do this to you. And you know, and so I think the biggest case that I have for Pilates is two things. And I think if there's a sell, here's what it is. Physical therapy, they heal people and fix people in two ways. One is manual manipulation. So for instance, if you're having a hard time accessing a glute or something, or any muscle or something infraspinatus, they will manipulate you. They will put you on a lacrosse ball, or they will put you on a foam roller, right? Actual manual manipulation does help the muscle get the move. We can move the leg, we can move you through range of motions. But you see in systems like cars and things like that, they say that if you can put motor control, if you can apply the movement yourself, that's even better. Pilates focuses entirely on you moving, right? So instead of like a chiropractor where they adjust you, you're aligned, and then you're just going to go sit in your car wrong in 10 minutes, right? Like, and then you have to keep coming back. And I think for its time, it was genius. You know, we come up with the ideas we come up with for their time. But I think the angle that Joseph Pilates came was completely different. It looks more like dance moves, Pilates. It's like dancing exercise when you see it, right? And it's movement. It's just a movement with some resistance on it. That's literally what it is. So the same way I would resist with a curl or a press, I'm going to now resist with a twist and a lift, right? So I'm still working these things. They're just, it looks like seeing an alien land or something. It's so foreign to us, right? And it makes us realize, like, wait, aren't we the experts of this body? And how do we not know this? Like, where are we that we have this huge disconnect? So I feel like, at least for lifters, I can't speak for all modalities. Dancers have definitely taken it up. I feel like something like Pilates is a perfect bridge, right? Even better than yoga, because yoga doesn't have any resistance, right? There's weight in Pilates. There's
Right. I was
reps
going
in
to actually ask
Pilates.
about yoga.
I think yoga, right. I think, but I think that's a thing, right? I think yoga will get all the principles of getting loose and all those things, but I think, for at least for us, the issue with yoga is hypermobility, right? A lot of us are very tight, and tight is good. Tight keeps you strong, tight keeps you looking stacked, but overly tight is bad. And I think what yoga does is that if you get good enough in its practice, it'll loosen you up, and you'll be, how do I say it? You'll be better off. But what we can see, at least from Stuart McGill's method, the big three, is that if you can move something, if you can contract something and stretch it with those simple exercises that he has, right? They're very simple. He's got bird dog, which is like a plank position, right? Pilates has that bird dog position. If I had to be honest and say, how many bird dog like variations and combinations does Pilates have? If I'm giving an honest answer, 40, I'd say. Probably 40, just in that position.
See, now all of my clients that get those in their programs all the time, I could be worse. I could be coming up.
It could be worse. Could be 40 times worse.
Yeah,
40 times worse.
And I feel like that hyper flexibility point that you make is really important, because like, I mean, I'm hyper flexible in certain areas, and
that's the last thing you need.
Yeah, and I've definitely seen it where just in my past experience, because I worked with I was in artistic swimming or synchronous swimming, whatever it's called now, but that's what I trained athletes for 12 years, and then I also did it, but like so much hypermobility but no strength within a range of motion, and that's what you can get into trouble with yoga because you can just like sit in these positions.
Absolutely.
And it does not help.
That's my
and
issue.
then
I used to have teachers come up and like my elbows hyperextend with stuff. And I did yoga like 4 or 5 times a week for years and was going to go start getting my certifications and everything. So I just loved it. And sometimes I can come home and feel more beat up from something like that in like the weirdest places where it's like, man, I did something wrong. And so it's funny because then you do have to almost be in like to me, I feel like I'm almost in a push-up because I have to think about not being hypermobile, and because that comfortable position would be bad. And so then you're kind of like bent with it. I don't know. It's very weird. I just went this last Friday actually, and I was like, how did I used to do this all the time? I woke up, you know how you said that broken arm feeling? I woke up the next morning after our gym had a hot yoga class. I was like, sure, why not? Let's go try it. And my husband and I went, and he's kind of like, he walks into those rooms, right? And people are like, what is he doing here? Like, he's this giant 6'5", like always been bodybuilding kind of guy. And we walk into yoga and like we compete, like we are going to win that yoga class, and like totally opposite of what you should be doing in there. Right.
I'm always like, I'm going to be the most flexible. Like,
hey, I'm going to hold everything for as long as I can. I don't care if I'm dying. Like at one point we're both like shaking so bad through holding these side planks. And the next morning I woke up and I was like, oh my God, my whole body's broken.
So here's what I find intriguing about Pilates, right? Okay, the way Joseph originally did it is that he has an order to his exercises, actually. So you start with where you can start. If you're not competent at an exercise, they don't advance you in Pilates, right? We keep you at a level where you can work well, where you can say, all right, how do I say it? If I find that you can't do something, we don't do it. We work around it. Same as bodybuilding. Yoga is very like, they go for it in yoga. They just go for it. They just say, come on, they push you, you can stretch. And Pilates is similar, except Pilates is trying to spit out one of 4 things, okay, with every exercise. It's either with an exercise, it's going to identify to say, hey, you're weak here, so it'll make you stronger here, or it'll say, hey, you got low stamina here, so it'll give that muscle stamina, whether it's that pelvic floor, breathing, anything. It'll say that this joint isn't stable, so hyperextending elbows is one of them. Pilates is all about stacking joints. We hear about stacking joints in squats. It's all the same ideas that we hear over and over. And then the last thing is that it does stretch you. So I find that in yoga, you get a lot of the stretch, but you might not get a lot of the stabilization, right? And we need the stabilization. We need it. So none of these are magic, like I said, right? Like thoracic flexion and thoracic extension, they're used everywhere. We use them in all sports, all modalities. But I think the thing that I find intriguing about muscles is how sensitive it is, right? Like you can do, how do I say it? You can do, let's say something like an RDL, right? You can do an RDL with 70% intensity for 10 reps, and the muscles will spit out literally like a fax machine, a certain result, hypertrophy, blah, 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 blah. Or you can do that same exercise for 30 reps and it'll literally spit out a different result. Muscles are I think we're finding what is actually the full range of their response. I think we've played around with them in terms of the hypertrophy range, and we've dabbled a bit in modalities. We've taken a lot of yoga sometimes and you fall off and things like that. But I think my question is like, what stays, right? Do we still remember back in the I had to say probably the 70s, 80s, when stretching was like the main modality? Static stretching was everything back then, right? And we've gotten more advanced, right? Now we know about dynamic stretching and things like that. And so I think, is Pilates up to be examined, right? I think it has 2 big barriers. One, it's hard to access, right? And the only people you see currently doing Pilates are rich white women. And
it's expensive.
It's expensive. And I think it's not expensive. I think it's exercise, right? Like a Pilates piece of equipment doesn't cost any more than a cable, sort of cable pulley pull-up piece of equipment, right? It's just a piece of equipment. I think a lot of what happened in like golf pre-Tiger Woods, is going on in Pilates right now. I feel like there's this sort of insider club with this golden piece of information. And I feel like in terms of sports, that shouldn't be that no one should have that, right? No, in terms of sports, if there's golden information, the same way that when we all found out about macros, we said, so how many people do you know who are struggling with their nutrition? Like millions, right? It's almost like we had to shout this thing from the mountaintops when we first found out about it. And so I feel sort of the same with Pilates. I've tried all the modalities. I've done them all. But Pilates has that method thing where you keep coming back and you stick with it. And it does that muscle thing. If you show up, it'll keep working for you. If you just keep showing up, it'll keep working for you. So I feel to get it down in price, the best thing you have to do is get more people to start doing it. And the more people who become aware of something, the better a market opens up. And it's, you can get your macros done for free these days, really, really and truly. So I feel I have at least 10 years of work of just talking about this thing and getting people to just do this thing. And my goal is to work with brands and get partnerships and work with local people, anyone from the Pilates world, to bridge them into here. And the best part of Pilates is that it's totally convertible to do for free too. It's just that these Pilates instructors make money off of doing Pilates, so no one has digitized the information yet. And that's the reason why I think it's so expensive.
How would you so I'm assuming you still lift, like you still train.
My main thing is lifting.
Yeah. So how do you incorporate Pilates into your strength training program?
I just go do it. I think that's the best part about it. I think it's so low recovery, right? It's the same way that Kelly Charette said, take your hour and do your mobility stuff, right? It's the same thing, except this one's structured. I have a teacher that I'm investing into, no different than how people invest into a teacher if they want to have better macros, better nutrition, better. And I use this as my modality. I still incorporate other things. I still stretch. I still do all the things to keep healthy. But excuse me, before Pilates, I felt like I was probably spending more time on trying to find warm-ups that work and sort of guess and things like that. And how do I say this? There are masters. There are people, like, we all love Paul, right? We all love Paul for what he's done.
We love Paul.
Paul is a nobody. They've been dancing since the days of like ballet. The ballet has mastered movement for like hundreds of years, right? Like, we're nobodies compared to the wealth of knowledge these dancers have. It's almost like, but we just can't read it. We just actually can't read their words. So I think for me, we can just do what the thing that has continued to make us great, learn new things, try things out. Some people might take to it, some might not. And I think the more people that become sort of like me, right, who can go fall in love with this method, learn this method, become coaches. I've seen this before. I'm telling you, when I first met Paul, it was back in 2009. We were both competing in an amateur show together, and Lane Norton was there. We were all there, a big bunch of dummies doing macros, right? No one believed in it. I saw it with my own eyes, right? And
Paul tells that story often.
He does.
How people all like looking at him and they're eating like their tilapia and stuff, and I don't know what he was eating, but he's like, suckers. And he was it
was revolutionary. It was revolutionary. It was revolutionary for its time. And the best part is that, how do I say, everything revolutionary is just an old idea that's come to new structure, right? So I feel the same with Pilates. I lift currently 5 times a week. I do cardio probably 4 to 6 times, and I do Pilates once to twice per week. I have a long Pilates session, which is about an hour, and then I usually have a short one, which is about half an hour. The Pilates is straightforward. It's simple. It's just a matter of moving things you don't move, right? Have you today done any spinal flexion? Have you today done any extension, left, right? Have you went through all the moves that your body is capable of moving? It's just saying, have you gone through these ranges of motion and moved through them? And the answer is no. We sit on our spine stacked, we row, we do the same thing, and we sleep, and our spine hasn't been moved for 3, 4, 5, who knows, right? And I don't think I'm saying anything genius or breakthrough. can you move your spine, the center thing of all, right? Like everything is connected to the spine. Every rib is connected to the spine. When you breathe, you move through the spine. When you move your arms, this collarbone is connected. This collarbone is connected to the spine. My first thoracic vertebra, everything is connected to the spine. And so I feel like if we can get a little more than just our morning stretch, like it's got to be something better than that, right? We're not cats and dogs who just stretch and go about our days. So for me, I'm not trying to revolutionize the way we train. I think the way we train is solid. I think the data has everything that it needs to say. But like most pro sports, what are the new additions that we should be adding? And I think we were all very open to this idea of mobility in movement when Kelly Starrett introduced it. This mobility thing, they've been doing yoga for 3,000 years. I'm sure they've been doing, right? And it's just another new one. It's just another, how do I say it? It's like another religion, so to speak, right? There are many ways to do it, but it's just in a different book or a different church or a different method, basically.
What I found really interesting being back at a big gym, because we have like a full setup here at our house for a garage gym. And between the pandemic and kids and stuff like that, it's been easier to just lift here for like a long time. And then I'm very much like in my own like vacuum, right? Where I'm doing like garage gym stuff. I'm by myself and things. And so it's always fun when I do go back to being in a big gym and just being surrounded by a bunch of people like working on stuff. And one thing that's been really curious to me, because I haven't been back since I like worked my way through some of my pelvic floor and core certifications and stuff. And there were a lot of exercises that are targeted, with what I was learning. It was helping women postpartum and things like that. But now it's funny. I'm at the gym and I'm seeing like we're still flooded with college kids that haven't gone back to school yet. And so there's just a minimum at the gym right now. And all of these girls are doing these core exercises that I feel like 18 months ago, nobody was doing. And I don't see anybody doing sit-ups anymore and like things like that. Like, I feel like people have finally figured out, like, they're just not the best thing. They're not a bad thing. They're not the best thing. And all of a sudden I'm seeing them do like these where I'm watching them focus on like core engagement and stacking their ribs over their pelvis and having a dumbbell somewhere and, breathing with their movement. And I probably look like this crazy person because I'll be sitting there resting between sets and like watching this 18-year-old girl, like, oh, yeah, who taught you that?
It's amazing. It's amazing.
How did you learn about this? Like the word is getting out. Well,
absolutely.
It is I'm starting to see more on social media. There are terms that for years now, when I work with women who want to like change how their bodies look and feel and how they function, from like, I don't want to have back pain anymore, or my ribs flare out, like different things like that. And then you say, well, it comes down to your breathing. And then they instantly check out and they're like, that sounds stupid. And I know, like, I've felt that way before, but it really does come back to that kind of stuff. And then now all of a sudden I'm seeing these influencers on, Instagram, who are like, oh, I couldn't make it to the gym today, so I just did like 30 minutes of pelvic floor movements, and like are showing this stuff that I feel like are, not on reformers and things like that, but like kind of like the similar like thought with things. And I'm like, oh my God, it's catching on. Like,
absolutely.
In the young people.
Yeah.
And the old people were crazy. Like, I feel like totally, Ryan, like what you said, like 30, 35, 40, 45. They're like, no, I'll cut my carbs and work out 7 days a week.
Yeah.
And, like I'll do that. Where I agree, you see like the younger generation, 20-year-olds, doing these more like these newer things.
It is interesting. I think their generation has blended, right? The generation before us was just work hard, put your head through a wall if it means working hard, right? Like
grind hard.
Nobody will do more than me. And then our generation came along and was kind of like, I don't know, man. And like try to combine it. It's like, I'm going to go ahead and do what you're saying I need to do, but I feel like I'm also going to start thinking about it differently. And then theirs has come along and been like, no, I'm not doing anything unless it's like specifically going to work for me. Like they're like, the thought process is just a little bit different with stuff.
Right.
And so that was going to be one of my questions with Pilates, because I feel like a lot of the people that we get to work with as lifestyle clients who aren't interested in going, you know, they don't want to compete. They don't, and like, that's a different,
they desperately want to lose body fat
in your brain though, right? Like if somebody says like, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get on stage, you know, they're like, those of us are like, we're a little bit crazy. There's something in there
Absolutely.
that like you said, we need that like control, and we'll do everything for it. And I mean, I've slowly backed off of that side of things and like have started to be more chill. Like I bounce around. I like with the bit getting bored and having to learn about things, I'll go through a phase where like all I did was run for like the first 6 months. And like you said, I tried to lift, I couldn't recover like enough. And so eventually, as my mileage got bigger going into the race, I wasn't lifting anymore. And I paid for it with injuries because I wasn't mixing things up and stuff like that. And I just completely lost my train of thought. Oh, so what I was going to say was like with Pilates, would you say it's something where you kind of have to have that desire to learn it more or to really focus on it? Because with lifting, like you said, we can send somebody into a gym and just be like, you know, if they've never done anything before, to go do 5 sets of 10 like dumbbell curls, and their arms could end up looking better if they just pick up the same 5 to 10 pound dumbbell and they just curl it, and they're not really thinking about it, and they're just doing this with their arms the whole time. Like we might be able to get them to lose weight. They might see some more muscle definition. It'll end up working to a certain extent. But do you think Pilates would serve somebody who maybe doesn't want to think so hard? Or like, do you have to kind of have that switch?
Yeah, but I also feel like for the I would argue that it won't work if you have that state of mind. I understand how I coach people too. I understand how they come in with that, but they get meager results. Muscles are very fair. It's an in-out system. You get what you do, right? So I'd say it's the same thing with Pilates. If you went and you didn't really want to commit, the same spectrum of muscle rules applied. You'd get a lot of results. You'd still, muscles are really amazing, you know, even if you're not there, it still works. I mean, just move. just you can do it completely wrong and it would still work. But as we know, the better you can get at something, it's like magic, dude. It's like magical, right? If you can just invest a little more and pay attention, it's like magic. And I think for me, I'm using Pilates now because Pilates was my in, right? I think for me, it's like, if let's say you can understand, if you can understand, let's say, for instance, macros, any new diet that comes out, you get it. You totally get what's going on. You say, I see what they're doing here. High fats beginning of the day, blah, blah, blah. You can read any language. And I think the point that I'm trying to stress is that we are what's the word I'm looking for? Illiterate for movement and mobility, right? Like you have to learn one to get in. And I'm not saying it has to be Pilates. It could be anything. It could be yoga. It could be anything. But I think there are principles that you've said, like you've learned, that people just don't know. What is going on with this pelvic floor stuff? What is going on with these internal things? And I think the difference with doing a bicep curl and still losing a bit of weight is that you're just using such an easy lever with an elbow or a shoulder that it's going to work. But there are like a million joints here, right? And you have to do it correctly to get some benefit out of it. And I think for me, if I had to say what most people need, if most people want to lose some weight, get fit, get some muscle, tone up, what we are already doing is it. I just don't see anything beating it. Like lifting weights, we know the rep ranges, we know the exercises. Like I think that is going to be most important for the world of osteoporosis, for that. I just don't think anything's going to beat that. And I don't think I'm here to replace anything. I think we know what works and what has been working. But it'd be like a baseball player who didn't know how to sprint or something. It'd be like we're missing something. And I find that something catches up to all of us around 30, 40, 50. Most people just stop doing it. They fall off. a terrible injury takes them out. And that, I feel like, is the stopping point. But there's got to be something, right? How is LeBron James playing till 50 years old? What's going on, right? Like, that must mean that within the new training that they've evolved, there must be supporting modalities. And I think the case I'm making is learn how to speak this modality, right? If you can learn Pilates, you can basically learn yoga. If you can learn it's the same thing, right? It's the same way that if you know how to do any arm workout, you know how to do all arm workouts. Even if you've never done a spider curl, you know the modality and the function of the arm well enough to still do it. Even if you've never done a Sotman curl, you can still do it. If I gave it to you blindly, you can do it. And Pilates is that same thing. It gives you a language in your hips. It gives you a sort of a mapping in your body, right? When you sit, you actually can know what's what. Where does this pelvis go? Like, we don't know. We're like big blobs in the middle, and then we lift the arms and the legs. Literally, it's like it's a mystery going on in here. And what I think these modalities do is that it's the same way Kelly Starrett says, start with that midline stabilization and all that stuff. It gives you a feeling. It gives you a tactile feeling to say, this is what this is. And so let's say you can get that feeling down. You can now teach that in your way on a bird dog better, right? I'm not saying that you only have to do Pilates, but for me, after 36 years of life, Pilates was the first thing that I did that I have a younger brother who's an Olympian, and he does Pilates with me, and he can't do these movements. To me, the proof is in the pudding. If I say lay on your back, put your leg this way, put your arm this way, you should just be able to do it, right? But there's obviously some missing in the function. They're not asking you to deadlift 500 pounds. They're just asking you to roll over, right? They're asking for very simple things, and the method is in the simplicity. So we must be missing something then, right? If I can't roll up and follow these rules and figure out this puzzle, then something in me is missing, and that small thing will catch up to me. One day I'll be doing shoulder presses, and you go in, they say it's not coming from your shoulder, it's coming from your rhomboid and this and that. And then you end up finding it's something really center. It's always something more. It always goes back center. You always think it's something in your calf. It's never your calf. It's your hamstring and it's your glute. It's never that. And what Pilates does is that it starts to practice from here. It teaches you how to move from here out. So when you go back and you say, let me go bench press, you're aware now. You're aware of how to stabilize these things. So I think for me to have that sort of physical mental map, it's so important. The same way, like with macros, let's say by now, I'm sure both of you are at this point, you don't have to track every single macro. I know that when I get up, it's going to be 18 grams. I don't have to even, I just know it, right? You get good at it after a while. We're missing that from here to here. We have no freaking clue what's going on in here. And for me, Pilates is the one that I've run into. If there's a better one, I'd preach a better one. I'm not loyal to anything. Like, I'm just loyal to what's the best for us. And for me, I got to go into a place, make an investment for a year or so, and I learned so much about my body. One of the things I have to do for my certification, all that stuff, I had to observe mad hours, right? And so I had to watch people do Pilates. It was like endless hours of watching strange people you don't know do Pilates, do all their Pilates session. And I watched all types of bodies. I mean, old, young, all shapes, all sizes. And I could not believe how universal some of these words were, some of these cueings were. And I said, this stuff works. If I can get a person to, so for instance, one of the best ways to in Pilates, one of the things they do, if I wanted to get someone to incorporate spinal flexion, thoracic flexion, looking forward, I would lay them down and I would say, look at your belly button. I'd lay them down and I tell them to look at it, look up and over it, right? That'll, instead of me trying to be too deep with it and say, pick your spine up and curve here, you just learn these cues of movement that are natural, that people can understand easily. So you take these complex kinetic things and you find an easy cue or an easy word or an easy way to do it. And once you can learn that within your body, I think that's what changes everything. I don't necessarily think it's the Pilates alone that's healing, but I think it's the knowing, and knowledge is, as we know, it's everything. If you can know, it's everything. So with people who don't compete, I think one of the things that they're missing more than anything is the endless hours of posing, right? One of the things I think that made me really physically healthy was all those hours of posing. Posing in some way reminds me of Pilates or yoga, right? It's a sort of movement modality. I'm moving, I'm squeezing everything, I'm consciously getting all my muscles involved. But all of them, but if you don't compete and if you don't flex those muscles, well, then you're missing a big part of the method, right? And I think that's what a lot of people who don't compete are missing. They want to come and use the tools that we use, but you haven't posed like every day for like every morning, right? After you use the bathroom, like you haven't done that, right? It's like the craziest
body
part
awareness.
of it's so important. And so for me, if you're not doing that, we need to have that portion in, right? So let's say posing is sort of a haphazard method of body awareness, of concentration, of posing. What happens when I don't want to pose? What happens when I'm done competing, right? Like, where does that leave me? And so I feel like Pilates for me has filled in a lot of those gaps. Even without the apparatus, without machines, you can implement a few simple things that gets people to be aware of their bodies and how to move. And I think spending time in your body, I mean, how many times must we go over this? In breathing, how much more data do we need on breathing? Right? How much more information do we need on this for us to do it? Like, how much more information do we need on spinal health? Like, it's so obvious. And I feel like the barricade is information, right? We just don't know. And I think it's time for us to say, we don't know. Everyone who's got the best throw yours. So I see Kelly Starrett's thrown his in the past 10 years. I've seen that Dr. Stuart McGill has thrown his on the table. A lot of people are throwing theirs on the table. A lot of people are trying. And I think the best one will win. I think it'll look something like, if I had to predict, a mix between all the worlds. I don't think any one of them is going to win, but I feel like for people who are coaches and always want to have more information, this is a huge piece of information we can learn. Literally, what is going on in this big blob of me, right? How does it move? How does it feel? Where do I anchor my pelvis when I actually turn this way? I actually don't know. And once you start seeing all these things, you're like, oh, well, this is like a squat. And you start piecing it together and it starts coming together. There's only one anatomically correct position. Pilates is not doing something new. It's just doing the correct positions, right? When I put my arm out to the side, what happens to my shoulder blade? When I put it up, where does my shoulder blade go? It's answering these questions, right? Where you might put your arm up and you hear a bunch of clicking. What's going on with this clicking? What's going on? What is this, right? It's answering questions that I have found personally no one has been qualified to answer except for these masters of movement, these dancers. They can answer the question. And it reminds me of that. I don't know if you've ever seen it, that scene from Pumping Iron when Arnold and Franco were doing that ballet in the beginning. And it clicked when I saw that. I said, oh, they've already been on to this. I said, they've already been here. They've already discovered this. So sometimes I feel like, for me, Pilates, in my opinion, is a lot like the electric car. Like, electric cars have been around. They're nothing new. But Elon Musk kind of re-picked up this idea, I think, and just sort of re-looked at it again. And I feel like we have to do that every 10 years with everything, nutrition and things like that. And I feel like now movement is a big one, which is why I see a lot of running, you see a lot of jiu-jitsu, you see a lot of people just trying to move, period. But as you said, we're not trying to be punched in the face. I'm trying to be in a Pilates studio, like that's not my MO.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of that comes down to like things that translate really well to just living a lifestyle of being able to feel good. Like, I work with a lot of clients that are in like their 40s and 50s, and they'll have a lot of aesthetic goals with things. And then when I make certain exercise recommendations, they'll be like, but is that gonna, do this or do that for how I look?
Absolutely.
And I'm like, well, it can if we lean really far into it. But the other thing is it's going to make sure you can like get off the toilet by yourself.
Absolutely.
And building up that.
Feel good to just go to the gym.
Right. And like, so I feel like there's a lot of stuff where just learning how to own the space that your body is in and understanding even just how to stand with like the good posture and being able to like, that can lead to a bunch of different things that you can do well, or maybe the things aren't snapping and cracking and like things like that. And I mean, the big thing I got out of today, besides the fact that I'm now signed up for a Pilates class, is that like, it can be really difficult for people to want to dive deeply into a bunch of different subjects, like not everybody is going to be a dog with a bone when it comes to like new things. Right. And they don't have to be like, but I think that if you're going to take something on and say, I have this goal where I want my body to be able to move the way I want it to feel and look the way I want it to, then it makes sense that you should also fall down a rabbit hole of learning about the things you're doing to try and get it that way. As opposed, like, there's a lot of times where we'll say, just, here's a plan, try just executing to start with, right? But like actual coaching comes along with helping to explain like why we're doing it that way, and cues and videos and like stuff like that. And so expanding your knowledge into something like Pilates can help you cue somebody better for how to actually brace for something. And cross over into like so many different things. And so I think it makes perfect sense what you're saying with like, it's not that this one thing is perfect, but right now it provides such a foundation for so many things that you love and that you teach others that, it's just really checking that box.
I think so. And I think it's needed too, right? I think the whole thing is, how do we change the trajectory of what we're doing with the thing we love and have invested in so much with lifting and all that? How do we get it to last till 70, past just the genetic outlier? Like, how do I really make it that long? Like, how do I really and truly make it that long? And like I said, I don't think it's just Pilates only. I think it's a matter of what holes are in our repertoire. And I think people who, like us, who are coaches, no one's ever going to believe you. Like, you have to go out on a limb, you have to do it yourself, you have to prove it, you have to take a lot of sacrifice. And that's the only way, I guess, to, in some ways, stay ahead of your coaching, is to try new things, is to not be too busy only writing the same program over and over and over, is to make space for yours. You got in this because you like to read and you like to educate yourself. And I think it's up to us to continue to do that. Like, you wouldn't have an archaeologist who hasn't updated their method in 20 years. Like, you got to update your stuff and keep going. So yeah, I think for me, I'm looking for answers. How do we sustain this? In every exercise, I would say, if there's one big thing that I have to say before this thing is up. All the exercises that we've learned, and maybe people have never read where these exercises come from, they've come from the world of strength and conditioning. If you strength and no condition, it's going to come back to bite you eventually, right? We currently have a culture of no conditioning whatsoever. And for me, if people aren't going to do box jumps and run stairs and those things like that, what is the new conditioning? If they're not going to pose for hours on end, what is the new conditioning? So I'm down the rabbit hole now. I can't believe I've accidentally become a Pilates teacher. I don't really even want to teach, right? That's not my goal, is to be stuck teaching Pilates. My goal is really to just tell people, look, try it, get in a studio, empty your mind, know it's a completely new thing, and see where it goes. To go as far. You might try 20 sessions, you might learn something. You might try 2 sessions, you might learn something. And I think the biggest thing is, if you do try, for anyone listening, it's just like muscles. You're not going to go in there and nail it the first time. It's muscles, right? You're never just going to put a child on their feet and they're going to walk right away. It's going to take many attempts for that child to walk. You're learning something new with your muscles. Muscles take a while to write their electricity and programming. And so the biggest thing I would say for that is, give it a shot. It's a conditioning method. It's a total body conditioning method. You'll feel aligned. You'll feel new. Weird things improve, right? Your reflexes improve, the way your feet root into the ground improve, and they automatically happen. That's how muscles work. They work while you're not focused on it. Your job is to show up, do the work, and things like that. So you have to tell me about how this first Pilates session goes for you. So
yeah, I'll keep you posted. I think it's up for like next Tuesday or something. They've got a 30-minute intro, which is funny because normally I probably would have been like 30 minutes, but now I'm like, I'm probably gonna get my ass handed to me for 30 minutes.
Is this at the box gym that you kind of were talking about? Like,
I'm at a Lifetime. So they have
Lifetime is good Pilates. They have good Pilates.
Bunch of stuff. Yeah. So I'm curious to see. I've seen people come and go. So now I'll be able to tell you.
I want to almost call you next week. How'd it go? Seriously.
Well, as soon as I'm out of the class, I'll hop over.
As soon as you're done.
And let you know. So
that's been my goal. That's been my goal. So that's awesome. Awesome to hear. So.
Success today. So thank you so much. It's funny because I set us for an hour and a half and I didn't know if we were going to go so long, but I feel like we could probably go on for
3 more hours for sure.
Yeah. I love it. So hopefully maybe we'll get to do this again sometime soon and we can all talk about if we try things and stuff like that. But I really appreciate you being available to come on and just give us this information we haven't even broached into before and learned something new. And you're awesome.
Awesome. I have to, if Paul listens to this, I have to tell this for Paul, and don't tell him if he gets to this. I have a lot of big visions that I want to do with Pilates. One of my big visions is that I want to come down to Florida. I want to somehow get Pilates equipment in Pro Physique Studio and just show this thing and like say this you can do for this exercise. This, so one of these days, I haven't gotten it yet, but I'm putting it out there. You know how you gotta start putting stuff out there. And I've done a million things for Paul, for, by the way, first off. So this wouldn't be a crazy idea. My goal is to try to pump Pilates into the Pro Physique community eventually. And just, I mean, who better? Who better? Who better?
Truly.
I love
really?
it.
What better to group?
Really campaign for this. Okay. So I'll be on your
That's my goal. And I know people down there with machines and stuff. So I'm trying to, it's the stupidest thing from a business perspective. I'm just like, I'm on like a Jesus mission. I'm just spreading awareness. I'm walking around and I'm just I have no goal other than to spread awareness of this thing. So that's it for now. All right. Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, you know where to find us. I mean, you found us on the podcast or on YouTube. You know where to find us with all of those. You can find Ryan on Instagram at the Natty Pro. Yeah. If you guys have any questions or any ideas for us for any future chats, let us know. And thanks for hanging out with us.
Thank you.